Grace Williams, a 72-year-old black woman, a retired Army nurse and the mother of a federal prosecutor, was simply tending to a rose garden when a police officer approached her with suspicion and escalating force. In the quiet neighborhood of Westview Hills, where safety was supposed to be a given, one routine evening turned fatal. The officer shouted. She stood still. Seconds later, she was dead from a single bullet to the chest. The shooter, Officer Brent Donovan, a man with a long, buried history of racial misconduct. What followed was not just grief, it was a national reckoning, a federal investigation, a historic trial, and ultimately, a death sentence, the first of its kind for a law enforcement officer in over a decade. But behind every headline was a deeper question. How many warnings does a system need before it acts? This isn't just a story about justice. It's about who gets believed, who gets buried, and who decides when enough is enough. So, before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Because what happened to Grace could echo far beyond one front yard. The last of the Texas sun melted over the manicured lawns of Westview Hills, casting long shadows across brick facades and hedgerows cut to military precision. It was the kind of neighborhood where silence wasn't just valued, it was enforced. Residents knew each other's names, cars, and routines. Outsiders were noticed instantly. Grace Williams, 72, was kneeling beside a bed of blood-red roses, her faded gardening gloves dotted with dirt and sweat. Her hands, though aged, moved with practiced care, trimming the last wild shoots from her favorite bush. It was a ritual for her, one that brought peace. She wore a simple lavender sweater, khaki pants, and worn sneakers, the kind of outfit that didn't raise eyebrows in most places. But Westview Hills wasn't most places. Brent Donovan's cruiser crept around the corner like a predator in no rush to pounce. He hadn't been dispatched. He wasn't answering a call. He was just cruising, as he often did through neighborhoods like this, his eyes scanning for what didn't fit. When he spotted Grace, he slowed. Then he stopped. He stepped out of the car. No lights, no siren. "Hey!" he barked, voice cutting through the stillness. "What the hell are you doing out here?" Grace stood slowly, brushing dirt off her knees. She turned to face him with the calm resolve of someone who'd lived through far worse than a rude voice. "Good evening, officer. I'm just tending to my roses." Donovan narrowed his eyes. He didn't respond to the greeting. His gaze swept over her. Dark skin, gray curls, weathered hands, plain clothes. He sneered. "You don't look like you belong here." Grace blinked. "Excuse me? You one of those maids who slips out when the boss is gone? Out here snooping around, casing the place?" His voice was thick with contempt. Her expression didn't change. "No, this is my son's home. I live here with him." Donovan took a step forward. "Your son lives here? In Westview Hills? What's his name?" "Malcolm Williams," she said evenly. "He works for the Department of Justice." Donovan laughed, a single, dry chuckle. "Sure he does. You got ID on you?" Grace's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't carry identification while gardening in my own front yard, and I'm not required to show it to you without cause." He smirked. "Cause? I got plenty of cause. You're acting suspicious. You're on private property." "This is my home," she repeated. "You can confirm it." He didn't want to confirm it. He wanted control. Across the street, on the second floor of a nearby house, a camera embedded in a smart doorbell was recording the interaction. Inside the home, no one was watching yet. But the footage was being uploaded to a cloud server in real time, second by second. Donovan placed his hand near his holster. "If you're not gonna cooperate, I'll have to detain you, for your own safety and mine." Grace raised her hand slightly, not out of fear, but clarity. "I have nothing to hide. You are escalating this for no reason. Don't tell me how to do my job, he snapped. She didn't. She simply stood her ground. 50 yards away, a 16-year-old boy named Jaden Reyes was setting up his phone to record a TikTok. He liked to catch the sunsets over Westview. The sky was streaked in purple and gold, and the lighting was perfect. As he framed the shot, he noticed the commotion down the street. He zoomed in, phone tilted sideways. Yo, what is that? His voice, though soft, got picked up on the stream. Dozens of followers were already watching. Comments started flying in. Grace remained calm as Donovan stepped closer. I'm going to ask you one last time, show me some ID, or I'm putting you in the car. I've told you already. I live here. I'm not carrying my ID, and I've done nothing wrong. Her words were firm, unwavering. They only enraged him further. What's that in your hand? He barked suddenly. Grace looked down at the small pair of shears she'd forgotten she was holding. These are garden clippers. Donovan's posture tensed. Drop it! It's not a weapon! Drop it! He screamed. From the upstairs window of a neighbor's home, a silhouette leaned closer to the glass. The blinds shifted. Another witness. Another angle. Another record of the moment where everything started to spin out of control. Jaden's stream was filling with emojis and shocked comments. Is that a cop? Why's he yelling at her? Wait, is she his grandma? Yo, this is messed up. The sun dipped behind the roof lines. A shadow fell over Grace's face. She didn't lower the shears. Donovan stepped forward. His hand gripped his holstered weapon. And that's when Jaden gasped. Oh, hell. The next moment would change everything. And Jaden, still holding his phone, would catch it all. Live. Jaden Reyes never intended to become a witness. At 16, he was more interested in filters and trending audio than justice or social issues. That evening, he was setting up a casual TikTok shot. Nothing fancy. Just another sunset over Westview Hills. He'd done this before. The view from his upstairs window was perfect. High enough to get the sweep of the neighborhood, low enough to catch interest in life moments. He opened the app, tapped Go Live, and let his camera roll. The comments began to flow immediately. Ayo, another sunset stream. Drop that playlist, Jay. Bro, give us the fire sky. But Jaden wasn't focused on the sky anymore. Movement in the frame caught his eye. An officer confronting an older black woman down the block. She stood near a rose garden, facing him. The officer gestured aggressively. Jaden pinched the screen to zoom. What the hell? He muttered under his breath. The chat lit up. What's happening? Is that a cop? Why's he yelling at her? The angle wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. The officer was in uniform, tall, broad-shouldered, and visibly agitated. The woman was holding something in her hand. Jaden recognized it as gardening shears. Show me your ID, the officer shouted, his voice sharp enough to pierce the air even from a distance. Jaden's breath caught. This wasn't some neighborhood dispute. This was serious. His fingers hovered over the end live button, but he didn't press it. Something told him to keep filming. Down in the comment section, viewers were exploding with concern. Why is he so aggressive? She's not doing anything. She's just gardening. He better not. Jaden adjusted his phone slightly, bracing it against the window pane. He wanted the best shot he could manage without being obvious. The sun had just dipped behind the houses across the street, casting a golden outline around the woman's figure. Her body language wasn't hostile. If anything, she looked calm. He couldn't hear her responses clearly, but her hands were steady. She wasn't flinching, wasn't backing down, but she also wasn't provoking anything. And yet, the officer kept closing the distance. The next few seconds happened quickly. The officer, now less than 3 feet from her, put his hand near his belt. Jaden's heart rate kicked up. Oh my God, he whispered. Don't do anything stupid, bro. The comments matched his anxiety. This is going bad fast. Why you reaching? Call someone." Jaden grabbed his second phone and dialed 911 with one hand while holding the live stream with the other. The dispatcher picked up. "What's your emergency?" "There's a cop out front of my house, 112 Westview. He's yelling at this old lady. She's not doing anything. He just pulled up on her. I think it's gonna go bad." "Is there a weapon involved?" "She's got gardening scissors. He's got a gun. He's yelling like crazy." "We're dispatching a supervisor now. Stay on the line." But Jaden's focus was already back on the scene. Donovan had just shouted something again. "Put it down! Put it down!" His voice cracked through the air like a thunderclap. Jaden winced. The woman didn't drop the shears, at least not immediately. Her shoulders stiffened. Jaden couldn't hear her words, but her mouth was moving. She was saying something, probably explaining, probably still trying to stay calm. The TikTok chat was in chaos. "This is crazy. She's clearly not a threat. Someone stop him. Save the vid. Screen record." Jaden glanced back down at his phone. Over 2,000 people were watching now, and the number kept rising. His feed was going viral in real time, but he didn't care about views. He wanted this documented. The whole thing felt unreal. Just moments ago, he'd been filming clouds. Across the street, the officer took another step forward, now towering over the woman. He was shouting again. The woman's voice remained soft, almost imperceptible from Jaden's perch. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't running. She was just standing. "What's wrong with this dude?" Jaden muttered. From behind him, his older sister Maya stepped into the room, drawn by the noise. "What are you watching?" "Not watching," he replied. "Filming. It's happening right now." She looked out the window and gasped. "That's Grace. You know her? She brings cookies to Mom every Thanksgiving. That's Miss Grace." "Holy!" Jaden stopped himself. Then he turned the phone slightly so Maya could see. "He's losing it." Maya grabbed her own phone and started recording too. "Keep it steady. Get his badge number." Jaden zoomed again. The image jittered but focused. Donovan. Brent Donovan. He said the name aloud, mostly for the video. Westview PD. As the tension on the screen escalated, the comments on TikTok began calling for someone to intervene. But it was already too late for intervention. Donovan's hand moved again, this time toward the grip of his pistol. Maya gasped. "Is he going to—" Jaden didn't answer. His fingers tightened around the phone. The video captured it all. The stance, the angle, the distance, the moment. What started as a casual sunset stream had become evidence. Real time, unfiltered, unmistakable. And Grace, still standing her ground, hadn't moved an inch. She responded with quiet resolve, but Donovan was far from finished. The wind shifted slightly, rustling the petals of the rose bushes beside Grace Williams' legs as she stood motionless on the walkway of 112 Westview Drive. Her back was straight, her expression unreadable, even as Officer Brent Donovan loomed closer, hand hovering near his holstered sidearm. The tension was thick, but she did not yield. Her tone remained calm, firm. "I told you already, this is my son's home. I live here with him," Grace said, her voice cutting cleanly through the charged air. Donovan tilted his head with mock curiosity. "Your son? In this house?" He gestured toward the 2-story brick residence behind her. "You're saying you live in that house?" "Yes," she replied, keeping her eyes steady on him. "With my son, Malcolm Williams." That name made Donovan pause. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, brief but noticeable. Malcolm Williams was not an unknown name in Texas legal circles. As a federal prosecutor, he had taken down multiple high-profile corruption cases and had been mentioned in national news more than once. Donovan had heard the name, but standing in front of him now was an older black woman in gardening gloves with dirt on her knees and shears in her hand. To him, that image didn't add up. He scoffed. "You expect me to believe that? That you're the mother of a federal prosecutor?" Grace didn't answer the insult. She took a breath. "I expect you to do your job with professionalism and reason. I've done nothing wrong." But Donovan had already made up his mind. "Look, lady," he said, voice louder now, "either you show me ID, or I'll place you under detainment. You're being uncooperative." "I am in my own yard," she said clearly. "I am not required to carry identification to trim flowers. If you had real probable cause, you'd already know that." Donovan stepped closer, his boots hitting the concrete with force. "You think quoting the law is going to stop me from doing my job? You don't get to dictate what I do." "I'm not dictating anything," she replied evenly. "I'm reminding you that we both serve something bigger than ourselves. Or at least, I did." He blinked. "You did what?" "I served as a U.S. Army combat nurse for 23 years. I've seen more violence than you can imagine. And I didn't come home from Afghanistan to be treated like a criminal in my front yard." Donovan stared at her, lips tightening. There was a moment, a very brief one, where uncertainty flickered again in his posture. He shifted slightly, adjusting his stance as if recalibrating, but then his pride rushed back in like a tidal wave. "Don't play the patriot card with me," he snapped. "You think that makes you special? That just tells me you know how to manipulate people." Grace tilted her head. "I don't need to manipulate anyone. The truth is simple. This is my house. That's my son's name on the mailbox. I've lived here for 3 years. You don't want to verify that because you're more interested in a certain power than in getting facts." The words hit harder than any physical resistance could have. Donovan's face reddened. His voice spiked in volume. "Turn around. Hands behind your back. You have no grounds to arrest me. You're being detained for obstruction and non-compliance," he shouted. "Non-compliance with what? Being black in a neighborhood you think we don't belong in?" Donovan's jaw clenched. His fingers grazed the metal clip of his handcuffs. He took a step forward, his shoulders squared, his body now blocking her path entirely. Grace didn't move. "If you think force is the only way you get to win this conversation, then I suggest you rethink why you became a cop. You think you're clever. You think this is a debate." "No," she replied. "I think this is harassment." From across the street, the faint sound of a live stream continued. Though neither of them could hear it, more than 5,000 viewers were now watching the confrontation unfold online. Screenshots were being taken, recordings were being saved. The image of an elderly woman standing tall before a hostile officer was spreading faster than wildfire. Donovan didn't know it. He didn't care. "Put the shears down." Grace looked down. The shears, small, silver, blunt-tipped, were still in her right hand. She had forgotten she was even holding them. Gardening was second nature to her, and the tool had become like an extension of her body. But now, with Donovan's fixation on it, it had transformed, at least in his mind, into a threat. "There for the roses," she said, lifting the tool just slightly as if to show him the dull ends. He flinched. "Drop it now," he barked. She didn't drop it. She didn't raise it either. She just lowered her hand slowly, carefully, in a non-threatening arc. And that's when Donovan made the fatal assumption. To him, any movement that wasn't submission was escalation. His shout rang out. "Weapon! She's reaching!" Grace's eyes widened, not in fear, but in disbelief. "I'm not armed," she began, but the words didn't matter. Donovan's hand moved fast, too fast. A single twitch of his finger was all it would take for everything to change. The air held still for a beat longer than it should have. Grace Williams's arm moved at a controlled, deliberate pace, lowering the garden shears toward the ground with no sudden motion, no threat, no resistance. Her posture was steady, spine straight. She had dealt with chaos before, in war zones and trauma units, but nothing about this moment should have required that kind of resolve. Yet, here she stood, in front of her home, being treated like a suspect for existing. Donovan's breathing grew shallow and rapid. His eyes locked onto the silver glint of metal in her hand as if it were a live grenade. His instincts, twisted by bias, fueled by unchecked fear, overrode any training or common sense. He shifted his stance. His hand moved. "Drop your weapon!" he screamed. Grace's lips parted. "It's not." The word never say finished. Donovan's right hand snapped to his sidearm, drew the Glock 19 in a single practiced motion, and pulled the trigger without a full second of hesitation. Bang! The crack of the gunshot tore through the calm of Westview Hills, louder than it had any right to be, sharper than the setting sun that spilled across the lawn. A flock of birds scattered from a nearby tree. The moment, captured on multiple devices from various angles, was now irreversible. The bullet struck Grace in the chest, just left of center. Her body recoiled a half-step backward. Her hand reflexively clenched, the shear tumbling from her grip. She stared at Donovan, not with terror, but with something colder, disbelief. Blood bloomed across the front of her sweater, a dark, spreading stain over lavender wool. She swayed, stumbled once, then collapsed sideways onto the grass, her shoulder landing beside the rosebush she had pruned just minutes earlier. One of the blooms fell, landing near her face. Her eyes stayed open. A voice from a distance screamed, "Oh my God!" Officer Riley Shaw had been watching the interaction unfold from 20 yards away. She had pulled up moments earlier in her own cruiser and hadn't had time to announce her presence before hearing Donovan yelling. She stepped out cautiously, her instincts telling her to intervene, but Donovan had waved her off. "Back off, Shaw. I've got this," he'd bark. She hesitated. Protocol dictated caution during officer-led confrontations, but everything about the posture, the shouting, the imbalance of power had raised red flags. And now, she had just watched a woman get shot. She ran toward the scene, calling out, "Donovan, what the hell did you just do?" Donovan didn't respond. He stood motionless, gun still in hand, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. The smoking barrel hovered at waist level. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Riley moved fast, weapon holstered, and dropped to one knee beside Grace. She checked for a pulse. Her fingers trembled. No carotid beat, no movement. Blood still flowed, dark and steady. She leaned closer, hoping, praying for anything. There was nothing. "She's gone," she whispered. She looked up, eyes burning into Donovan. "What did you do?" Donovan finally blinked. She had a weapon. She didn't listen. I gave commands. That was a 70-year-old woman with pruning scissors," Riley snapped, and she raised it. She lowered it, Riley said, her voice hard, disgust creeping into her tone. "You fired before she even got a chance to speak." Donovan stepped backward, gun still out. He seemed detached from the reality of what had just occurred. He scanned the surrounding houses. Curtains had moved. A few doors opened. Murmurs spread like wind through trees. Across the street, Jaden's phone jerked in his grip. The feed shook violently for a second as his hand lost control. "He shot her," he yelled, voice cracking. "He just shot her." The comment section of his live stream exploded. "No way. He really did it. She's dead? Saved alive. Tag the news. Send this to CNN. Get out of there." Maya, now standing behind her brother, reached for her own phone. "Call Mom," she said. "Now. This is going to blow up." Donovan finally seemed to realize the sound of sirens approaching. Riley was already on her radio requesting EMS, backup, and immediate command-level intervention. Her tone was clipped and professional, but her eyes remained locked on Donovan. "You need to put your weapon away, now." she ordered him. He looked at her blankly, as if waking up from a trance. Slowly, mechanically, he returned the pistol to his holster. A woman screamed from 2 houses down. Someone shouted, "They shot her!" Another person yelled, "I got it on my camera too!" Phones were everywhere now. Neighbors emerged from doorways, some filming, others shouting, many just staring in horror. The neatness of Westview Hills was broken. Its quiet dissolved in chaos. Riley stood and stepped in front of Donovan. "You stay here. Don't speak to anyone. Don't move. This is now a crime scene." Donovan nodded once, lips pale. His hand hung at his side like dead weight. Jaden, shaking, ended the live stream. He didn't want to, but his mother had called, her voice frantic in his ear, ordering him to come inside. He saved the video, backed it up, uploaded it to 3 cloud services, and then collapsed to the carpet in his room. The video was already being clipped, reposted, re-uploaded, and reshared. On Twitter, the phrase Grace Williams began trending within 10 minutes. Within 20, hashtag gardening while black became a hashtag. And within the hour, every news station in the state had received the footage, and the world was about to learn exactly who Grace Williams was. The wail of approaching sirens echoed through the manicured streets of Westview Hills, shattering the manufactured calm of the affluent neighborhood. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off polished SUVs and pristine windows. Neighbors gathered behind their hedges and driveways, whispering in clusters, clutching phones, recording what they could. But it was already too late for help. An ambulance screeched to a halt in front of 112 Westview Drive. 2 EMTs jumped out, pushing a gurney across the lawn. One of them, Marcus Blake, scanned the scene as he knelt beside the woman's body. Her sweater was soaked dark, her chest unmoving. He pressed 2 fingers against her carotid artery, checked her pupils, and shook his head once. No pulse, no response. Rigor not set. She's fresh. The second EMT, Carla, began prepping a defibrillator anyway. Protocol demanded they try, even when hope had left the scene long before they arrived. Riley Shaw stood nearby, hands clenched, eyes locked on the body. Her uniform was damp with sweat, dirt smudged on her knees from kneeling beside Grace earlier. She hadn't moved since calling for backup. Her thoughts raced, but her mouth remained shut. Donovan was seated on the front stoop, legs spread wide, both elbows resting on his knees. His radio, clipped to his vest, crackled with static as he pressed the button to speak. "This is Officer Donovan, badge 2485, requesting supervisor and internal response. Suspect down after resisting commands. Subject displayed threatening behavior. Shot fired in self-defense. EMS on scene. Copy." He released the button and let the words hang. None of them felt real, yet he said them with robotic certainty, as if he'd rehearsed them a dozen times. Riley turned to him, jaw tight. She didn't resist. "You shot her while she was talking." He didn't look at her. She raised a weapon. She raised a pair of clippers and lowered them before you pulled. Donovan didn't reply. He just stared at the sidewalk in front of his boots, as if something vital had fallen there and rolled just out of reach. "Do you want to change your report?" she asked. His jaw twitched. "No." Riley swallowed hard. Her heart beat against her ribs like a drum line. She had always been the type to speak up, but protocol was a wall she'd hit before. A dozen things told her to say something now. But standing there, next to the man who had pulled the trigger, still holding power, she hesitated. She looked at Grace Williams' body, motionless on the lawn. Her blood soaked the green grass like spilled ink. Riley felt the weight of that image sink into her spine. Across the street, Detective Ethan Miller's unmarked black SUV pulled up. Miller, mid-40s, tall, sharp-jawed, with the worn look of a man who had seen too much, stepped out slowly. He took one look at the scene, cordoned-off lawn, blanket-draped body, officer seated silently, and his gut tightened. He walked toward Riley first. "Shaw, you the first unit?" She nodded. I pulled up just before it happened. "What do we have?" She hesitated, glancing toward Donovan, then back to Miller. "One subject down. Female. Civilian. Shot once. Center mass. Donovan says she resisted. EMTs say she's gone." Miller studied her face. "Did you see it?" "Yes," she said. Then after a beat, "But I didn't intervene." He waved me off. Miller noted her tone, the stiffness in her posture, and stored it away. He turned to Donovan. "Walk me through it." Donovan stood. "I was patrolling when I saw a suspicious individual near the porch. Didn't recognize her. Asked for ID. She refused, became aggressive, reached into her clothing, then raised what I believed to be a weapon. I gave verbal commands. She ignored them. I fired once to neutralize the threat. And the weapon? She had gardening shears." Miller raised an eyebrow. "You feared for your life over gardening shears?" She was close. Her posture was sudden. I reacted. Miller nodded slowly. He'd been on the job long enough to know that sometimes people made terrible calls under pressure. He also knew the look of a cover-up when he saw one. The details didn't line up. He jotted a quick note and moved toward the body. The EMTs had already placed a white sheet over Grace. Blood pooled underneath, a dark outline expanding from beneath the fabric. Her hands had been folded neatly by one of the medics, an unnecessary courtesy for someone declared dead at the scene, but a gesture of respect all the same. Miller crouched, gently lifted one side of the sheet. He saw the bullet entry, perfectly center. He looked toward the rosebush nearby. Gardening tools still sat untouched on the edge of the walkway. The clippers were small, dull, nothing remotely threatening. He stood, exhaling through his nose. "Has anyone notified next of kin?" he asked. "Not yet," Riley replied. "Who is she?" "We don't know yet," Donovan cut in. "She said she lived here," Riley added. "Said her son was Malcolm Williams." Miller froze. "Malcolm Williams? U.S. Attorney Malcolm Williams?" She said it clearly. Miller took a long moment. He turned his eyes toward the house. Modest, well-kept, federal plates still parked in the driveway. He'd heard Malcolm mention his mother moving in with him a few years back. Suddenly, the weight of the situation shifted. He pulled out his phone, stepped a few paces away, and dialed a number from memory. Inside the ambulance, Carla reached up to close the doors but paused as Miller stepped back into the frame. "Hold transport," he said. "We're not moving her. Not until the coroner arrives. And I want photos, precise angles. Bag the clippers. Do not process them as a weapon." Carla nodded. Miller turned back toward the street, scanning the gathering crowd, then looking down again at the blood-stained lawn. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew it already. Something was very, very wrong here. Detective Ethan Miller stepped through the front door of 112 Westview Drive with deliberate care. The living room was clean, quiet, almost sterile in its arrangement. The air was faintly scented with something floral, likely from the vase of fresh-cut lilies on the entry table. It was the kind of home that suggested order and intention. Nothing out of place, no clutter, just warmth and discipline. The kind of home that didn't match the chaos bleeding out on the lawn. He moved quickly but respectfully, not like someone tearing through a suspect's apartment, but like a man searching through a friend's house after a fire. His gloves snapped on, his eyes scanned. The officers outside had already confirmed there was no one else in the residence. The EMTs had stepped away. A forensics unit was en route, but Miller didn't wait. He needed confirmation now, and something told him the answer was inside. He started in the front room. The mail pile on the side table was slim, mostly addressed to Emma Williams. A few catalogs, no overdue notices, no red ink. Miller sifted through, looking for anything addressed to someone named Grace. He moved down the hallway and turned into what appeared to be a guest bedroom, though it had clearly been lived in. On the dresser was a photo of an older woman in an Army nursing uniform, standing beside a younger man in a graduation robe. Same gray curls, same eyes. Grace, no doubt. Next to the bed, on the nightstand, sat a small leather-bound notebook. He opened it. Tidy cursive filled each page. Reminders, grocery lists, a few scribbled recipes. He flipped to the back where emergency contacts were listed. His eyes locked onto the second name on the page. Malcolm Williams, son, U.S. Attorney's Office, 202-555-2198. Mobile, 202-555-8074. Miller exhaled slowly, then flipped the page again just to be sure. Another sticky note was tucked inside the front cover. Malcolm has court Tuesday. Remind him to take his vitamins. The simplicity of it hit harder than he expected. He stepped out of the bedroom and walked back to the living room. A family photo sat in a frame near the fireplace. Malcolm again, a few years younger, standing between two women. One was clearly Grace. The other, perhaps a sister or wife. Behind them, the seal of the Department of Justice hung on a wall. Miller didn't need further confirmation. He took out his phone, dialed the number listed under office. It rang twice before being picked up. A low, professional voice answered. "This is Williams." Miller steadied himself. "Mr. Williams, this is Detective Ethan Miller from the Maplewood Police Department." A pause. "Yes? I'm calling in regard to an incident that occurred at your listed residence in Westview Hills earlier this evening." There was a brief silence, then a tightening in the voice. "I'm not there right now. What kind of incident?" Miller shifted, moving to the window. "Sir, there was an officer-involved shooting. A woman was fatally wounded at your address." Silence. "She was identified at the scene as Grace Williams. We located documents confirming her relation to you." "I'm very sorry, sir." The line went dead quiet, not even breathing. Miller waited. A full 8 seconds passed. Then a sharp intake of air, the kind you hear when someone is punched without warning. "Say that again," Malcolm said, but this time his voice was colder, controlled, hollowed out. "Your mother, Grace Williams, was shot by a responding officer during a patrol interaction. EMS declared her deceased at the scene. The situation is under active investigation." Another pause. Then, who was the officer? Officer Brent Donovan. The silence came back, but it was different this time. Heavy, violent, the air between the words burned. "I'm on my way," Malcolm said, and the call ended. Miller stood for a long second, the phone still in his hand. He looked back at the family photo again, the smiling woman in uniform, the proud son, all of it, now a frozen reminder of what had been lost on a patch of grass not 50 feet from where he stood. He walked to the front porch as another patrol unit arrived. The first of the media vans was already pulling into the end of the street. Neighborhood residents had begun to form a wider ring around the crime scene tape. Riley Shaw was still standing where she had been before, eyes on the sheet-covered body. He confirmed. Miller said. She turned slowly. "It's really her?" "Yeah, that was Grace Williams, and her son is exactly who she said he was." Riley nodded once, jaw clenched. Miller didn't speak further. He pulled out his notebook and wrote one more line. "Victim, Grace Williams, mother of U.S. Attorney Malcolm Williams." Then he underlined it twice. And as the sun disappeared completely behind the horizon, Miller understood that what had started as a traffic stop-style encounter was about to erupt into a national firestorm. The office of U.S. Attorney Malcolm Williams was quiet as the day wound down. Most of the staff had gone home. The overhead lights hummed, and outside the windows, Washington, D.C. faded into its twilight glow. Malcolm sat at his desk, reviewing a briefing on a pending RICO case against a multi-state drug ring. The weight of federal deadlines was routine now. Facts, files, witness protection logistics, all typical. Until his phone rang. He glanced at the number, local code from Maplewood, Texas. His eyes narrowed. He answered calmly, as he always did. "This is Williams. Mr. Williams, this is Detective Ethan Miller from the Maplewood Police Department." There was a pause on the line. Miller's voice was professional, but held something underneath it. Urgency. Malcolm leaned forward. "Yes, I'm calling in regard to an incident that occurred at your residence in Westview Hills earlier this evening. I'm not there right now." "What kind of incident?" Miller hesitated. "Sir, there was an officer-involved shooting. A woman was fatally wounded at your address." Something inside Malcolm slowed. His thoughts did not spin. They froze. He didn't blink. He didn't move. She was identified at the scene as Grace Williams. "We located documentation confirming her identity as your mother." "I am so sorry, sir." The pause that followed was absolute. No background noise, no breathing, just static tension, thick as glass. When Malcolm finally responded, it was with the kind of clarity reserved for people accustomed to tragedy. His voice was even, quiet, but his hand, unseen by the detective, had begun to tremble where it gripped the edge of his desk. "Say that again." Miller repeated it, slower this time. Malcolm stood, one hand still on the desk, the other fisting tightly at his side. "Who was the officer involved?" "Brent Donovan," Miller said. Malcolm's jaw locked. He didn't ask for any further details. His mind had already leapt past the implications. A name he recognized. A department with a history. A neighborhood where he had chosen to move his mother for peace and safety. Westview Hills, where things like this weren't supposed to happen. He did not scream. He did not curse. He simply ended the call with 4 clipped words. "I'm on my way." He stared at the empty chair across from his desk for a full second after the line went dead, his fingers pressed so tightly against the mahogany surface that the skin turned white. Then he picked up his phone again and dialed a different number. "United States Attorney General's Office. How may I direct your call?" came the prompt. "This is Malcolm Williams. Put me through to Attorney General Judith Price, now." There was no hesitation. He waited less than 15 seconds before a voice came on the line. "Malcolm, it's late. What's wrong?" He didn't ease her in. "My mother was shot and killed by a police officer in my own front yard. His name is Brent Donovan, Maplewood PD." A beat of silence. "Oh my God, stop. Listen. I don't want this processed through channels. I want federal jurisdiction assumed immediately. I want the Civil Rights Division activated. And I want FBI on site within the hour. Malcolm, no hesitation, no buffer, no waiting for press releases or internal reviews. This was not just a shooting. This was a racial profiling escalation that ended in the execution of a 72-year-old black woman, an Army veteran, and my mother. I need you to understand something very clearly. This isn't gonna go quiet." Judith's voice was sharper now. "I understand. You'll have my authorization in 5 minutes. I want Special Agent Sarah Jenkins leading it. Civil Rights Division. She worked the Denver PD corruption case and the Chicago bias investigations. She knows how to handle law enforcement scrutiny. I'll make the call. Make it now." He ended the call before she could say anything else. Then, finally, Malcolm let his breath out and sat back down in his chair. His hands were still clenched. The tendons in his forearms ached. He looked at the framed photo on his desk. His mother, standing at his swearing-in ceremony in D.C., her hand resting on his shoulder. She had worn that lavender sweater, the same one she'd been wearing when she was killed. He knew it even before seeing the forensics. Malcolm didn't cry. He opened his drawer, pulled out a legal pad, and started writing names. Every single person who had ever filed a complaint about Brent Donovan. Every city council member who had voted against body camera audits. Every DA who had declined to investigate use of force cases from the Maplewood Police Department. He wasn't making a list of enemies. He was making a timeline. There would be no delay, no grace period, no slow crawl through red tape. Down the hall, an assistant leaned into his office doorway. "Sir, are you—" "Call the press team," Malcolm said without looking up. "We'll need a holding statement prepared by midnight, not for release, just to have ready." The assistant nodded and vanished. Malcolm folded his hands over the list. His mind was already calculating angles. Who would leak the video? How fast the news would spread? How this wasn't just about his mother, it was about the people who had been ignored when they didn't have a federal badge in the family. He didn't know what Donovan was doing now. He didn't care. All that mattered was what came next. And what came next was the full force of federal power descending on Maplewood. Inside the Hoover Building in Washington, D.C., the mood was urgent but controlled. The Civil Rights Division of the FBI had received the call just before midnight. The name Malcolm Williams carried weight, but it wasn't the title that moved the Bureau. It was the facts. A federal prosecutor's mother had been shot dead in her front yard by a local police officer. Body cam footage existed. Eyewitnesses existed. And the entire confrontation was already ricocheting across social media. Special Agent Sarah Jenkins arrived at the command floor conference room 10 minutes after the bureau chief signed the formal jurisdiction notice. She was in her 40s, known for being exacting, relentless, and unshakable in the face of institutional pressure. She had taken down entire precincts before. She was the one they called when police departments crossed the line and tried to bury it. A tall man in a suit met her outside the room. "We've secured authorization." DOJ signed off. "The case is yours." "Maplewood PD?" she asked. "Officially ordered to stand down. They'll support, but you're lead now." "Good. What do we have?" "Victim is Grace Williams, 72, retired Army nurse. No criminal record. Mother of U.S. Attorney Malcolm Williams. Shot by Officer Brent Donovan. Single round to the chest. Claimed self-defense." "Body cam?" Sarah asked. "Retrieved. Still sealed. Uploaded to Quantico server for review. Footage from a neighbor's Ring doorbell also exists. That's being pulled now. There's a live stream circulating on social. Partial angle, but enough to show escalation." She nodded once. "I want all video secured. Full chain of custody, no leaks. Who's got local jurisdiction right now?" "Detective Ethan Miller. He's the one who notified Williams. I've worked with Miller before. He's sharp." Sarah didn't wait for further briefing. She walked briskly to the operations room where 2 agents were already loading files and prepping departure kits. "Put me on a flight. Wheels up within the hour. I want the boots on the ground before sunrise." An analyst stepped in from the adjacent hallway. "We've already begun pulling Donovan's personnel file. You'll want to see it." "Walk it to me," Sarah said, not breaking stride. As they moved through the corridor, the analyst summarized. 12 years on the force. Maplewood PD. Prior military police. No criminal history. No sustained misconduct charges, but we're seeing a disturbing pattern in complaint records. Excessive force, racial profiling, verbal abuse. Nothing ever stuck. All internally dismissed or downgraded. Sarah's jaw clenched, which means someone's been covering for him. Likely. She reached her office and grabbed her badge, firearm, and tablet. She paused only once, long enough to glance at the email she had received directly from Malcolm Williams. Short, formal, and lethal in tone. It was not a request. It was a demand for action, backed by federal gravity. The jet touched down just after 4 o'clock a.m. at a secure airfield outside Maplewood. An FBI convoy was already waiting. By 4:30, Sarah and her team had arrived at the local bureau office, which was quickly transformed into a command hub. Maps of the crime scene, witness statements, and video evidence files were distributed across a war room wall. She stood in front of a group of 8 agents, each one assigned a specific thread: digital forensics, internal affairs coordination, community interviews, department audit. "We are not here to react," she began, voice sharp. "We are here to expose." The victim was not armed. The preliminary footage suggests clear escalation by Officer Donovan without lawful basis. We don't go in with assumptions. We go in with evidence. But if what we're seeing holds up, this is not just excessive force. It's a civil rights violation at the federal level, possibly premeditated bias, possibly obstruction inside the department. She turned to the tech lead. "Status on the body cam? Currently undergoing secure frame-by-frame decryption. High-res pull will be ready in 2 hours. Raw audios already transcribed. Good. Prioritize timestamps for verbal exchanges and motion anomalies." Sarah moved towards the whiteboard, circled 3 items in red: body cam, witnesses, officer history. She addressed the room again. "I want every witness identified and contacted today. I want a complete psychological profile on Donovan by noon. Start with his incident reports from the last 5 years. Anything flagged for use of force or civilian complaints goes on my desk." Outside the bureau walls, the news cycle had exploded. By morning, national anchors were referencing Grace Williams' death in opening segments. The clip from Jaden's live stream had gone viral overnight, viewed over 9 million times across platforms. Activists, journalists, and legal scholars were already dissecting every frame. But inside the FBI command center, Sarah's team didn't rely on social media narratives. They worked with hard files and federal statutes. One of the junior agents entered the room with an encrypted hard drive. "Agent Jenkins. Ring camera footage from the neighbor's house. It's clearer than the TikTok." She took the drive, plugged it into the projection server, and watched silently as the video began to play. There it was. Grace standing calmly on the porch. Donovan approaching aggressively. Verbal commands escalating without threat. Grace holding garden shears at her side. Her posture relaxed. Her voice low. The moment Donovan shouted, "Drop it," and fired, before she had time to respond. Sarah didn't speak. She watched the frame where Grace hit the ground, then froze the image. "Timestamp?" she asked. 18:42:09, mark it. She removed the drive and handed it to forensics. "Full enhancement. I want environmental audio separated, background amplification, and isolate Donovan's tone variance." She turned to her lead analyst. "This clip isn't just evidence. It's the foundation of the case." The agent nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah looked once more at the paused screen. Grace lying beside her rose bushes, the life gone from her face. "This footage will define everything. Start decoding. It's going to determine whether this ends with an indictment or something even bigger." Inside the digital forensics lab at the FBI's Maplewood field office, the room was silent except for the low hum of server towers and the occasional tap of keys. The space was dim, lit mostly by the glow of multiple monitors, each displaying paused video frames, audio waveforms, and metadata grids. The analysts wore headphones, hunched forward with professional detachment. But even they couldn't ignore the weight of what they were seeing. On the main screen, Officer Brent Donovan's body cam footage played out with chilling clarity. The lens was angled slightly downward, showing the front yard of 112 Westview Drive. The timestamp marked the moment of arrival. No visual anomalies, no external movement, just an elderly woman standing near a flower bed, pruning roses. Grace Williams appeared in frame at 18:41:27. She turned calmly toward Donovan's approach. Her hands were clearly visible, one of them holding a pair of small silver garden shears. They weren't pointed. No erratic movements. No raised voice. Senior digital analyst Denise Lau leaned forward and adjusted the zoom. Pause at frame 238. The playback stopped just as Grace said something inaudible under the wind and street noise. Her body posture was relaxed, arms at her sides. The shears were pointed toward the ground. "Enhance this section," Denise said. "Audio filter. Boost speech frequency range between 1.5 and 3 kilohertz." Her colleague, Mason Clark, ran the enhancement software. A clean audio track emerged through the room's speakers. Grace's voice, low and composed, cut through the silence. "I live here. Please lower your voice." Donovan's voice followed immediately, harsh and rising. "Drop what's in your hand." The analysts paused the clip again. Mason spoke without turning his head. "She's not raising it. Not even a flinch. Look at the trajectory of her elbow. She's de-escalating, not advancing." They resumed the video. The seconds dragged out. The tension was undeniable, but it was entirely one-sided. Donovan's breathing became audible through the mic. His tone sharpened. "You're threatening me. Last warning." Grace replied, "That's not a weapon." Then came the shout, "Drop it!" followed less than half a second later by the gunshot. The camera jolted from the recoil. Grace dropped instantly, the frame shaking as Donovan stepped backward. The lab went quiet again. Nobody spoke for several beats. Denise pressed a key to freeze the footage on the moment after the shot. Grace's body was on the grass. The garden shears had fallen several feet away, glinting harmlessly in the sunlight. She drew a breath. "Run that section again. 0.25 speed." The slowed video showed the same sequence. Grace lowering the shears. Donovan escalating. No forward movement. No resistance. The evidence was irrefutable. "There's no threat," Denise said. She didn't move toward him. She didn't swing. She didn't raise her voice. And that tool was no more dangerous than a ballpoint pen. Mason looked over. "Do we have forensic distance estimates?" Denise clicked open the analysis overlay. 7 feet at the time of the shot. No lunging. Static posture. She's actually stepping back during the last second before the discharge. They reviewed the frame-by-frame timestamps. At 18:42:08, Donovan shouted his final command. At 18:42:09, he fired. The delay between the two was 0.7 seconds. "She couldn't have reacted if she tried," Mason muttered. He pulled the trigger before she finished blinking. Denise saved the analysis package and labeled the file. Donovan body cam primary. Confirmed unjustified discharge. She stood, collected the external drive, and headed down the hallway to the command suite. Special Agent Sarah Jenkins was reviewing initial witness statements when Denise entered the room. Without a word, Denise inserted the drive into the conference room terminal and brought up the footage. Sarah watched silently as the scene played out. Her arms were crossed, her jaw clenched slightly at the key moments. When the clip ended, Denise spoke. "We analyzed everything. Movement vectors, threat posture, distance, timing, and audio. There's no justification. Grace Williams posed no threat. The officer fired while she was stationary, verbal, and visibly retreating." Sarah nodded once, then turned toward her assistant. "I want the entire file on Officer Donovan. Pull all internal investigations. Every citizen complaint, traffic stop data, officer reports, anything with his name on it. Get records from his academy days if you have to." Her voice had no tremble, no rise in pitch, but everyone in the room felt the shift. The case had just turned. It was no longer a tragedy. It was a pattern waiting to be proven. "We're building a timeline," Sarah continued. "If this isn't the first time he overstepped, we'll prove it. And if someone helped bury the past, they'll be in this with him." She turned back to the footage, froze it at the moment. Grace collapsed. "We start here, but this doesn't end here." She stepped away from the monitor and moved toward her field lead. "Notify Internal Affairs Liaison at Maplewood PD. Tell them we want full cooperation. No delay, no redactions. This is now a civil rights investigation under federal enforcement authority." The agent nodded and left the room. Sarah looked at the frozen screen one last time. The blood-stained sweater, the motionless hand near the shears, the legacy of a life taken not in chaos, but in silence and assumption. "Start digging," she said. "Let's find out who protected this man, and for how long." Inside the temporary FBI field office in Maplewood, Agent Sarah Jenkins stood in front of a whiteboard filled with printed documents, sticky notes, and highlighted incident codes. She held a black marker in one hand, her sleeves rolled up, her expression hardening with each new page pinned to the board. Behind her, her investigative team sat at laptops and scattered desks, combing through a decade of disciplinary reports, citizen complaints, body cam data logs, and internal review memos. The deeper they dug, the more consistent the picture became. "Let's start counting," Sarah said flatly. She tapped the board. Incident 1. Verbal harassment complaint. Black male. Routine. Traffic stop. No citation issued. No follow-up. Incident 2. Use of force. Teenage Latino boy detained during a stop and frisk outside a convenience store. No weapon. No charges. Filed under officer discretion. She moved down the list, page by page. Incident 5. Woman stopped walking her dog. Claimed Donovan yelled racial slurs when she asked why she was being questioned. Dismissed as unsubstantiated. Incident 9. Elderly black veteran pulled over, forced to exit his vehicle at gunpoint. Dashcam was malfunctioning during the stop. Internal review closed within 48 hours. Sarah circled each case with a red marker. 11 complaints. 11, all from civilians of color, spanning 9 years. Not one resulted in disciplinary action. A junior agent raised her hand. "Are we seeing a consistent approval pattern on the reviews?" "Yes," Sarah said, walking to the chart. 3 different supervisors over the years, but all internal reviews were processed by the same risk mitigation officer, Captain Darren Broyles. He's signed off on 9 of the 11 complaints. Another agent pulled up Broyles' profile on the screen. Captain Broyles retired last year. No formal misconduct. Reputation for keeping complaints internal. Sarah took a step back, arms crossed. So Donovan escalates force, profiles minorities, and the same officer keeps burying it. No external investigations, no disciplinary hearings, just closed files and rewritten narratives. The evidence was indisputable now. She turned to the tech team lead. "Compile the full summary and timelines. I want everything mapped visually. We'll cross-reference with body cam access logs, patrol routes, and any deleted footage requests." He nodded and got to work immediately. Sarah turned to Agent Denise Lau. "You spoke to the union rep?" "Yes. The police union claims Donovan was a model officer, commended twice for decisive action in volatile encounters." "What kind of volatile?" "One was a trespassing call. Other was a suspicious person in a parking lot. No charges were filed in either case." Sarah looked at her for a long beat. How many of his commendations involved people who looked like Grace Williams? Denise didn't respond. Sarah stepped back toward the wall. He was protected. That's the only conclusion. The pattern isn't just abuse, it's insulation. There's no mechanism inside Maplewood PD that ever held him accountable. Every single flag was ignored, rewritten, or buried. The air in the room was thick with quiet fury. No one needed a speech to understand the significance of what they were uncovering. It wasn't about one officer losing control. It was about an ecosystem designed to look the other way. Sarah turned toward the door. "Get me transcripts of Donovan's last psychological evaluation. And pull his training files from the academy. I want to know what they taught him and what they ignored." An agent handed her a sealed envelope just as she reached the hallway. "Ma'am, you'll want to see this. Internal email recovered from department archives, dated 3 years ago." Sarah opened the envelope. The email was from a patrol supervisor to Internal Affairs. Subject line, "Concerns regarding Officer Donovan." The body of the message read, "Repeated observations of aggressive tone and unwarranted stops of black residents in District 4. Officer refuses de-escalation coaching. Recommend formal review." Stamped diagonally, across the bottom. Closed. "No further action recommended." Sarah folded the paper slowly, then slid it into a case file. Add that to the brief. Outside, in front of the FBI office, a crowd had begun to gather. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, facing a makeshift podium set up near the barricade. Behind it, a single microphone. Cameramen adjusted their angles. Boom mics dropped into position. Police cruisers idled nearby. Every local news affiliate had shown up. CNN and MSNBC had gone live minutes earlier. A helicopter circled overhead. U.S. Attorney Malcolm Williams stepped forward in a dark suit, a plain black tie, and no notes. His face was composed, but unreadable. As he approached the podium, the murmuring stopped. He scanned the crowd, exhaled quietly, and began. "My name is Malcolm Williams. I'm a federal prosecutor, but today I stand here not as a lawyer. I stand here as a son." The crowd leaned in. 3 days ago, my mother was shot and killed by a police officer in the front yard of my home. She was unarmed. She was not resisting. She was 72 years old. She had served her country as a combat nurse and had never committed a crime in her life. Her name was Grace Williams. Camera shutters clicked in rapid succession. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an accident. This was a decision made by a man with a badge who saw a black woman with pruning shears and decided that was a threat. He paused. And what we're learning now, what the FBI has begun to uncover, is that this was not his first time crossing the line. He was reported. He was warned about. He was protected. Again and again. The silence among reporters was total. There are people alive today because officers chose to de-escalate. My mother is not one of those people. And the question I ask, the one I demand every leader in this country answer, is this: why did it take the death of the mother of a federal prosecutor for the system to finally pay attention? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He simply let the question settle, hanging in the air like a gavel. Then he stepped back from the microphone. And as the flashbulbs erupted, Sarah Jenkins turned from the screen inside the FBI office, knowing that the investigation had just entered a new and irreversible phase. The briefing room at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. was packed tighter than any in recent memory. National outlets had claimed their front row positions hours before the scheduled start. Journalists from CNN, MSNBC, Reuters, and the New York Times lined the walls, their cameras already rolling, their fingers poised over keyboards. Boom microphones hovered like vultures above the podium. The press badge line stretched down the hall. At the center of it all stood Malcolm Williams. He didn't wear a flag pin. His suit was simple, charcoal gray. His voice, when he stepped to the podium, was calm, controlled, not cold. His hands rested on the edge of the lectern, steady, but with just enough pressure to whiten the knuckles. My name is Malcolm Williams. I serve as a United States attorney. And I'm here because the justice system failed someone I love. The flash of camera bulbs lit up the room. My mother, Grace Williams, was a veteran, a nurse, a grandmother. She survived 2 deployments overseas, raised a family, cared for neighbors, and planted roses every week in front of the house we shared. She was killed on that lawn while doing just that, gardening. He paused, letting the silence form its own echo. I believed in this system. I worked inside of it, enforced it, defended it. I helped build cases with the same departments I now see from the other side of the table. But now I ask you, if someone like my mother, someone with no record, no aggression, no threat, can be gunned down without warning in daylight on her own property, then who exactly is safe? The tension in the room shifted. No one moved. No one looked away. We've heard a lot about fear, about officers making split-second decisions. But where is the accountability for patterns of behavior ignored, for warnings buried, for systems designed to protect power instead of people? He glanced briefly at the sea of lenses in front of him. This is not a tragedy. It's not even just a failure. It is the result of long-standing permission. Permission given by silence, by policy, by protectionism. And it has cost lives. This time, it cost mine. The microphones amplified nothing but truth. Malcolm looked directly at the row of reporters from law enforcement-affiliated publications and lowered his voice slightly, the tension in his words making them hit harder. I want to ask a question, and I want it asked again and again until someone in power answers it honestly. He leaned in. Gardening while black. Is that a crime now? The room exploded in camera flashes. Reporters scrambled to transcribe. Phones lit up with real-time social media updates. The hashtag was already spreading. #gardening while black. He straightened, voice measured once more. I understand grief. I understand rage. But what I will never understand is how we reached a point where a calm explanation by a 72-year-old woman to a uniformed officer was not just ignored, but erased in less than a second by the sound of a trigger pull. He took a single sheet of paper from the folder beside him. It was his mother's Army medical discharge record. He held it up. This is her record. It documents 23 years of service, including 2 combat tours. The same hands that bandaged wounds and saved soldiers were the ones holding garden shears when she was labeled a threat. Malcolm set the paper down, silent for a beat. I know this investigation is federal now. I respect the boundaries of my own office. I am not involved in the prosecution, but I will continue to speak, not just because she was my mother, but because she represents so many whose names don't make it to podiums or television screens. He stepped back slightly, eyes locked on the front row. I believed in this system, and now I will help fix it. He nodded once, then walked away from the podium without another word. The press erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Will there be charges? How many officers had prior complaints? Do you plan to file a civil suit? Will this impact your role as U.S. attorney? But Malcolm didn't stop. He exited the room, flanked by aides and DOJ officials, leaving the press and public with his words echoing behind him. Hours later, the Department of Justice released an official statement from Attorney General Judith Price. In it, she confirmed the appointment of a special federal prosecutor to lead the criminal investigation into the death of Grace Williams. The move was described as extraordinary but necessary, citing the gravity of the incident and the need to ensure complete impartiality, given Malcolm Williams's role in federal law enforcement. The selected prosecutor was Amanda Holloway, a senior attorney from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division with a reputation for taking on some of the most complex police misconduct cases in the country. Known for her decisive style, methodical preparation, and high conviction rate in cases involving excessive force, Holloway was a choice that sent a message. She would have full authority, independent from both the local district attorney and Malcolm's office. Her remit: determine whether Officer Brent Donovan's actions constituted a criminal violation of federal civil rights statutes, and to pursue the most severe penalties allowable under law if warranted. Sarah Jenkins received the official briefing that same afternoon in Maplewood. Her team had already begun the transfer of evidence and briefing documents to Holloway's legal office. Case files, transcripts, enhanced video footage, use of force analysis, personnel records, they were all packaged and indexed. Sarah stood with her arms crossed, watching the files upload to the secure federal cloud system. Her voice was low but final as she gave her last instruction to the room. From this point forward, the legal weight shifts. The investigation is done. Now we prosecute. The marble halls of the United States District Court in Maplewood echoed with the measured footsteps of Amanda Holloway as she made her way toward the federal courtroom assigned to the case. Dressed in a navy suit with no adornment, her presence exuded the quiet certainty of someone who had spent 2 decades dismantling lies inside courtrooms. She did not carry a briefcase, only a thin folder in her left hand and a digital tablet under her right arm. Her reputation preceded her. Amanda was known not for theatrics, but for building airtight cases and delivering them with surgical precision. The building had seen its share of high-profile proceedings, but nothing had prepared its staff for this. The shooting of Grace Williams had ignited a firestorm. Protesters and supporters crowded the sidewalks. Barricades had gone up 2 days before the announcement. The judge's chambers were under additional security, and federal marshals had been placed at all public entrances. News crews were stationed on every corner. No one in the country doubted the stakes. A police officer was facing federal charges for the killing of a black civilian, but not just any civilian, the mother of a federal prosecutor, and not just any charges, capital crimes. Amanda stepped into the war room set up for her legal team. A projector screen displayed a timeline of Officer Brent Donovan's use of force history. A second monitor showed synchronized footage from his body cam, the neighbor's Ring camera, and the viral TikTok live stream. Every second had been timestamped and cross-referenced. The digital map tracked Donovan's patrol routes for the past 6 months, revealing a pattern of over-policing in predominantly black neighborhoods. She turned to her deputy, Elias Moore, a seasoned trial lawyer with experience in civil rights litigation. "Have we received the final authorization from the Attorney General?" Elias nodded. "Just came through this morning. Full authority to pursue capital punishment under 18 U.S. Code, Yart 242, deprivation of rights under color of law resulting in death." Amanda looked at the screen showing the moment of the shooting. Grace's body, the blood-stained sweater, the garden shears lying harmlessly in the grass. Her voice remained even. "Then we go all the way." Within hours, she stood before the federal grand jury and formally filed charges against Officer Brent Donovan. The indictment contained 3 counts. Count 1. Deprivation of civil rights under color of law resulting in death, a violation of Grace Williams' constitutional right to life and freedom from excessive force. Count 2. Use of a firearm during a violent federal crime, a mandatory enhancement carrying a possible life sentence. Count 3. Second-degree murder under federal jurisdiction, a killing committed without premeditation but with clear disregard for human life. Each count was supported by overwhelming evidence: video, audio, forensic data, and a mountain of personnel records outlining prior misconduct. There were no gaps, no speculation, and no ambiguity. It was built for one purpose: to show intent, to prove pattern, and to convince a jury that the death of Grace Williams was not an accident, but the result of a system that had allowed Brent Donovan to operate unchecked. At the arraignment, Donovan appeared in federal court for the first time. He was brought in through a secure tunnel, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals. He wore a standard gray detention jumpsuit, no longer the uniform of a man in authority. His expression was flat, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed the stress beneath the surface. Amanda sat at the government's table, reviewing the indictment again with the same intensity as if it had just been drafted. She stood when the judge entered, nodded politely, and took her seat only when instructed. The courtroom was packed. The press gallery overflowed. Grace's family sat in the first row. Malcolm Williams silent, hands folded in his lap. Judge Harold Lunsford, a firm but fair federal judge with 20 years on the bench, read the charges aloud. Donovan pleaded not guilty to all counts. His defense attorney requested bail. Amanda objected. "Your Honor, this defendant is charged with a capital offense. He used his authority as a law enforcement officer to unlawfully detain and execute an unarmed civilian. There is overwhelming evidence against him, including his own body-worn camera footage. Bail would constitute a failure to uphold public safety and trust." Judge Lunsford denied the request without hesitation. As Donovan was led out of the courtroom, reporters bolted for the exit to file updates. Inside the war room, Amanda's team prepared the trial calendar. Jury selection would begin in 6 weeks. The trial itself could last months. National attention was guaranteed. Back in her office, Amanda addressed her team in a short strategy meeting. "We don't need a spectacle. We need precision. Let the evidence speak. Don't overstate. Don't provoke. This is not about outrage. This is about responsibility." She pointed to the screen, displaying an enhanced still of Donovan's body cam. Grace Williams's face was visible, composed, her mouth mid-sentence, her hands clearly at her sides. The image would be shown on day 1. "This," Amanda said quietly, "is our opening statement." Her tone didn't change, but her intent was clear. Every juror would see what Donovan saw, and what he chose to ignore. Every witness would testify not about theory, but about fact. The trial would not be about race in the abstract. It would be about how one officer acted, how one department protected him, and how one woman paid for both with her life. The press dubbed it the Donovan trial before the first witness list was finalized. The White House issued a brief statement supporting the Department of Justice's decision to pursue accountability. Civil rights leaders praised the aggressive stance, calling it a historic step toward institutional reckoning. But Amanda didn't respond to any of it. She spoke only in filings and in courtrooms. As the courthouse prepared for the opening day, extra barricades were ordered. Hundreds of spectators planned to attend. The country watched with one question on its mind. Would justice truly be served? The courtroom doors opened. The trial was about to begin, and the eyes of the nation were fixed on what came next. The federal courtroom was at capacity before the bailiff even opened the main doors. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of attorneys, observers, reporters, and community members. National press lined the rear wall, notebooks ready, cameras restricted to outside the chamber but rolling during every break. Uniformed U.S. Marshals stood along the edges, eyes scanning, posture rigid. The seal of the United States District Court hung above Judge Harold Lunsford's bench, a silent reminder of the gravity now unfolding beneath it. Amanda Holloway stood at the government's table, flanked by 2 prosecutors and a digital technician. She wore the same composed expression she had maintained from indictment to jury selection. She wasn't interested in shock value. She was interested in results. Across the aisle sat Brent Donovan, dressed in a dark gray suit that didn't quite fit right, as if borrowed or bought under duress. His face was pale, his hands fidgeting with the edge of a legal pad, flipping it open, then shut. His attorneys whispered occasionally but got little response. He kept his eyes forward, except when they flicked briefly, nervously, toward the jury. The 12 selected jurors sat silently in their box, all of them focused. 6 women, 6 men, a mix of races, ages, and professions. Their faces were unreadable, but their posture was alert. They knew the weight of what was being asked of them. Judge Lunsford entered at exactly 9 a.m. All rise. Everyone stood, then slowly sat as the judge signaled. He glanced over the room, his expression serious but neutral. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, "we begin this trial with the understanding that no one here is above the law, and no one is beneath its protection." He looked toward the prosecution. "Ms. Holloway, you may proceed with your opening presentation." Amanda stepped forward without notes. Her voice was clear, not loud. "We are not here because of a misunderstanding. We are not here because of a moment of confusion or a fleeting lapse in judgment. We are here because Officer Brent Donovan, while sworn to protect the public, unlawfully shot and killed a 72-year-old woman named Grace Williams without justification, without threat, and without hesitation." She gestured to the jury. "You will hear the words he spoke. You will see the footage from his own camera. You will meet the witnesses who watched it unfold. And when you do, you will know that Grace Williams died not because she was dangerous, but because she was dismissed, profiled, ignored, and silenced." She stepped aside. The government calls its first exhibit. The technician dimmed the lights and began playing the synchronized body cam footage. The courtroom quieted into complete stillness. On the screen, Grace Williams appeared, standing in her front yard, garden shears in hand, her posture calm, her voice low. Donovan's approach was abrupt. His voice escalated quickly. The jury watched as he ignored her answers, cut her off, and shouted his final command. Then, the gunshot. The footage ended, and the lights came back up. No one in the room moved for several seconds. Amanda called her first witness, an FBI forensic analyst who had compiled the synchronized footage. He walked the jury through every frame, explaining how audio was enhanced, how no sudden movements were made by Grace, how the timeline of events left no reasonable window for perceived threat. Next came Dr. Rebecca Lynn, a trauma psychologist and expert in police behavior under stress. Her tone was clinical but accessible. "Based on the footage and Officer Donovan's body language, we observe a pattern of cognitive distortion, meaning he interpreted non-threatening behavior as hostile due to prior bias. However, training protocol exists to prevent this exact reaction. Those safeguards were not followed." Amanda nodded. "In your professional opinion, was the use of force justified?" "No," Dr. Lynn said flatly. "There was no imminent threat." Officer Donovan's response was not aligned with the threat level presented. Then came the medical examiner, who confirmed the bullet entered Grace's chest at close range, passed through the left lung and heart, and exited through the back. Death was instantaneous. The shears, she added, were found more than 3 feet away from the body, showing they were not being wielded or pointed. Finally, Amanda called the neighbor, Linda Ramirez, whose Ring camera captured the incident from a second angle. "I was watching from my window," Linda said. "She wasn't doing anything wrong. She just looked confused." He never gave her a real chance to explain. Amanda nodded slowly. "Thank you, Miss Ramirez." The judge called for a recess, giving the jury time to absorb. Donovan sat motionless at the defense table. His attorney leaned over and whispered something. He didn't answer. When court resumed, the defense began their response, arguing that Donovan had only milliseconds to make a life or death decision. They suggested that the angle of the shears, the positioning of Grace's hands, and the stress of the situation contributed to what they termed a tragic misjudgment, not a crime. Amanda objected twice, once for speculation, once for emotional framing. Both sustained. Mid-afternoon, Judge Lunsford addressed the defense table. Is the defendant prepared to testify on his own behalf? Donovan's attorney hesitated, looked to his client, then back to the judge. He is, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Proceed tomorrow morning. The courtroom emptied slowly, the weight of the footage and the testimony still hanging in the air. And as the lights dimmed and the public filed out in tense silence, everyone knew what was coming next. Donovan's voice, under oath, and whether it could withstand the truth already laid bare. Brent Donovan took the witness stand slowly, the weight of the courtroom pressing in on every step. His suit was wrinkled at the sleeves, his tie uneven. When he sat down, he didn't look at the jury. His eyes dropped to the table, and he kept them there. His voice, when it came, was low and cracked. I didn't mean for it to happen, he said. I was scared. I thought she had something. I panicked. Amanda Holloway rose from her seat without a word and stepped forward. You panicked, she repeated flatly. Despite 12 years of training, thousands of hours on the street, and a civilian standing still in her own yard, you panicked. Donovan's shoulders hunched. It happened so fast. Amanda didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The video shows her hands down. No sudden movement. No threat. You gave an order, and you fired before she could comply. You executed a 72-year-old woman for gardening. I didn't know who she was, he said quietly. That's the problem, Mr. Donovan, Amanda said, stepping closer. You didn't know, and because she was black, and because she didn't fit your picture of who belongs, you decided she was a danger. Donovan's hands trembled slightly. He wiped his face. The tears were there, but they did not move the jury. He tried to explain further, offered fragments, about fear, about adrenaline, about training, but none of it held. The evidence was too strong, the footage too clear. His intent, though unspoken, had been recorded from 3 angles. The jury had already seen what they needed to see. Later that day, Judge Lunsford instructed the jurors with final clarity. They returned to the deliberation room just after noon. The courtroom remained in a heavy hush. Reporters stood still, cameras off, but anticipation sharp. The Williams family sat in the front row, hands clasped, unmoving. Malcolm stared ahead without blinking. By the second hour, word spread that the jury had reached a verdict. Back in the courtroom, everyone rose as the foreman handed the folded verdict slip to the bailiff, who gave it to the judge. Judge Lunsford looked it over, then nodded. His voice was steady. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law resulting in death, how does the jury find? The foreman stood. We find the defendant, Brent Donovan, guilty. On the charge of use of a firearm during a violent federal crime, guilty. On the charge of second-degree murder, guilty. A breath seemed to leave the entire room at once. Donovan slumped. His attorney placed a hand on his arm. He didn't look up. In the gallery, no cheers, no cries, just silence and tears. Malcolm closed his eyes. A single tear traced down his face. But it wasn't over. 1 week later, the courtroom filled again, this time for sentencing. The jury had been given the rare task of recommending between life without parole and death. After reviewing aggravating factors, including prior complaints and abuse of authority, they had reached consensus. Judge Lunsford returned to the bench, his robe heavy, his face more solemn than before. Mr. Donovan, he said, you violated the most sacred duty entrusted to law enforcement, the duty to protect. You acted not in fear, but in prejudice, and in doing so, you extinguished a life that represented service, dignity, and peace. He paused. This court, having considered the jury's recommendation, hereby sentences you to death under federal law." Donovan didn't react. He seemed already gone, emotionally numbed beyond reach. The courtroom again fell silent. There were no cheers, only the soft sound of chairs creaking as people exhaled. Outside the courthouse, the world reacted. Some protested, some praised, but most simply absorbed the weight of what had occurred. The first death sentence for a police officer in over a decade, delivered not with anger, but with clarity. That evening, Malcolm returned to 112 Westview Drive alone. The garden had been carefully restored, the rose bushes trimmed. A fresh layer of soil covered the scarred lawn. He sat on the edge of the flower bed, near where his mother used to kneel, the smell of earth and memory thick in the air. A small voice interrupted the quiet. "Are you her son?" Malcolm turned. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, stood at the edge of the yard, pointing at the plaque now installed near the roses. He nodded. "She was nice," the girl said. "She gave me a tomato once." Malcolm smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Yes," he said, "she did that." The girl waved and walked off. Malcolm looked back at the roses. Justice had come. But peace was something else. Justice doesn't bring the dead back, but it keeps their deaths from being forgotten. The story of Grace Williams is not just about one wrongful death. It's about a system that looked away until silence became impossible. It's about the cost of unchecked power, the long shadow of racial bias, and a son who turned his grief into a mirror held up to a nation. Justice, in this case, came not with celebration, but with the solemn understanding that it arrived too late to save a life, but just in time to give that life meaning beyond the grave. Grace may be gone, but the questions she leaves behind are louder than ever. If a 72-year-old veteran can be seen as a threat in her own front yard, then what does safety really mean? And who gets to have it? What would you do if someone you loved became a hashtag before they were heard? If this story moved you, help us keep these conversations alive. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel so that voices like Grace's and those fighting for her are never forgotten.